This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 61st episode of Breaking Banks Europe. Today, we talk gamification. Gamification is a very interesting topic that has been part of my fintech literature ever since. And the reason myself I delved into the gamification concept is because I understand the difficulties of fintech to motivate their respective consumers to consume financial services on the mobile, where there is not a human relationship in place that can help them making cunning financial decisions. Now, as most of us consume financial services not for the sake of that, but to reach out and to basically achieve goals and fulfill certain ambitions, in a sense, we make decisions to move forward in life and go towards a final destination. Isn't that like a game, basically, when you have to make decisions facing very complex situations that don't always depend upon your judgment and willingness? And therefore, you need to find a way to make the best decisions. Sometimes you make a mistake, sometimes you lose, sometimes you gain. So now I always thought that at least the principles of gaming well apply to financial services, but sometimes also the gaming itself can be used in order to help educate the final consumers of financial services to learn how to better make financial decisions. Clearly, everything can also be abused. We've learned that in banking. We need to make sure that the moment we apply gamification principles, we do that with sound understanding of ethics, basically in a transparent way, so that this is done in the best interest of the final consumer, not necessarily that of the platform. Now, as this is a very dense topic that touches upon many topics which go from theory to application, it is not just restricted to financial services, it's actually a broader industry that touches a variety of different types of applications. We have invited today's two special guests to discuss gamification with us and bring this interesting perspective on Breaking Banks Europe. So let me introduce you to these two guests of today's show. We have, first of all, Jasmin Karatas. Jasmin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the invitation, Paolo.
So, Jasmin, just a brief introduction of yourself. I understand that you've been working on product design and game theory. Can you just pinpoint for our audience what is your core perspective, and then we'll delve into your expertise.
So for me, my core perspective on gamification is that it's based on emotions. Most of the people see in it points, badges, and leaderboards and short-term engagement, which is true when you design it in that way. However, I think that there's more in gamification than to leverage than we did beforehand. And this is my special point of view, that if you leverage the emotional part of way, we leverage behavior. And for that, we can make it more engaging, not just the learning aspect of gamification, putting into if we're looking more and more into games. And
thanks, Jasmin.
That's my point.
You actually use a very important word, and I want to get back to that later on, which is emotions. That is very, very important. We also have in the show Philipp Wagner. Philipp, welcome to Breaking Banks Europe.
Oh, Paolo, thank you for having me. Hello, Jasmin.
So, Philipp, you yourself have an extensive experience in terms of working with the gaming industry, which is really, really broad. So I understand that you looked at that really from the gaming point of view, not necessarily financial services. Can you basically help the audience understand what is your experience and what would be your contribution today?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So what I'm doing is since long time, 15 years or longer, I'm doing research. I'm researching actually video games with publishers, with game developers together in order to create better games. So what we are doing, we are looking into game design. We are pre-testing games. We are post-testing games, and always be critical. What worked, what doesn't work, where can we add new features or new values to the users, and so on. So there are many aspects which we have done in the past. The whole industry also changed radically with the addition of mobile gaming and so on. The possibility of tracking data and looking really into user behavior. But this is what I have done. This is my job, looking and testing video games and making an assessment of qualities and giving recommendation to the developer and the publishers.
So, Philipp, we want to, at some point, ask ourselves whether fintech offers can be video games or not. We have some contrasting experiences in the industry, and it would be interesting. It would be interesting to learn from you what you believe is the division between when a game is a game and when life starts, because we are touching a very complex topics like playing with money, right? Which means that is real money, is not a game. But let's start from the very beginning and let's help the audience understand what is gamification, as there could be multiple aspects around that. Who wants to start? Jasmin?
Jasmin, ladies first.
Okay, thank you, Philipp. And sorry, welcome to you as well. I completely forgot to welcome you as well. I'm sorry. So gamification is very, very broad. And I usually say I was once asked if there are different schools to it. So I go with the frame or with that at the moment. So the different schools for me. So I think there are. So there is this, I would say, it's a bad term, but to say old school gamification, this is the normal gamification we can see is like the points, badges, leaderboards thingy, which is working, which is short term, where you can add points to something and you can earn it, and then the customer does the thing and it's a carrot. Then there is the learning aspect of gamification, where you try to give this more of the educational touch. And then I think there is a little bit of the holistic gamification, which is more into the game aspect, and where it's getting very, very, very blurry if it's still gamification, if it's already a game, if it is serious gaming. And to be frank, as games doesn't have a real definition, I say for myself, gamification as well doesn't have for myself a definition. There is one, yes, but to apply game mechanics on a non-game context can be various. And this is where I see myself always a little bit struggling when I try to explain what really is gamification now.
Jasmin, can I say that we can see the gamification with two perspectives? One is the principles and the mechanics of games that can be applied to a human interaction. Now we're thinking about human and digital interaction. That basically means build the mechanisms for pain and gain that engages people to move forward, to do things, of course, transparently, to do it for the best. And on the other side, we have instead the real gamified experience, like turning something or a problem into a game, so the individual is aware that it's part of a game, so that they can start engaging. So we can think the first one is more behavioral economics or behavioral finance, on the way you relate to people accessing a service, and the second one instead could be a trading a game that really teaches people through a real game or engages them in a game-like modality. Would that be correct?
That would be correct. I just would phrase the second one as a serious game then. That is just for me and my vocabulary, because if the user knows he is in a game, it is clearly a game and not a gamification for myself. for the definition. Because if the user knows he's in a game aspect, he knows that it's voluntarily and he knows that it's a game, then it's not anymore a gamification. Gamification for me clearly is something which is purely in the business area where people doesn't know that they are gamified.
Yeah. So I would say that maybe the the reality in between could be building games like What If that educate people before they take a real action. So it's not a game they're part of, but when they ask themselves, shall I make this investment? Shall I buy this insurance? Shall I save more? They can somehow gamify that for a bit to understand what it is. And then they go back to the other principle. While I know that some fintech offers, especially in the space of investment management, try to fully gamify that experience, and maybe they are going too far because then people start missing the point. What is a game? What is reality? Now, Philipp, what do you think about this? You really come from the game, the real games. So how would you define gamification and blur the line between the two?
I mean, for me, gamification is actually just one mechanic. It is just a tool which I'm using in order to achieve a specific goal, like engagement, for example, you mentioned, or to get a higher retention. So gamification for me is just a short-term mechanic in order to get some sort of reaction, a behavioral reaction. That can be anything, like a reward or achievement. Jasmin talked also about leaderboards and something like that. So these are different just elements out of a broader concept. And the question is now for me, if I am an experienced designer, what kind of elements can I use in order to achieve higher engagement? So that is for me the question. So then I'm saying, okay, I use a brick of gamification for that specific context and achieve something. That is not a game yet. So game for me has something more immersive. A game for me is always some skill element which I have to achieve. And it is surrounded with some music, some skillful play, and so on. So it has a much higher complexity than a pure gamificated user interaction. So gamification is short-term. Game is always complex and much more long-term oriented.
Okay, so let's say, Philipp, the industry, especially the fintech movement, have been discussed ever since the concept of user experience. And I like to say that user experience is not that important. Let me qualify it. It is important, but it's not strategic because it commoditizes very fast. And I'll say that I can open a bank account in 1 hour instead of 1 week. I expect that every bank will do that 5 years from now. What really becomes strategic in digital life as well as in real life is the engagement model. And that is where I believe the gamification in terms of principles and mechanics comes to play, because you're basically saying that it teaches you to look at the engagement mechanism and framework in a different way, so that you can better relate with the final consumers, or let the final consumers better relate with you, finding the right perspective, the right motivation, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So if this is so, which are the dimensions of this gamified engagement or gamification applied to the engagement mechanism that developers, fintech entrepreneurs, bankers would have to consider? Can you help me out understanding this?
Sure. I mean, if I can just add here, for me, it would be, if I'm coming from a banking perspective, really from a business perspective, the dimension for me would be the control and empowerment which I'm giving away to the user group. So if you're looking at banking in a classical sense, the banking had all the power. They were giving out basically their forms, the counter offering, when the timing, when I can use some certain branches, and so on. So the whole user interaction was determined by the banks. Now I'm through digital engagement. That is, of course, giving us the flexibility of self-serving And here, that is the power where I give power and control to the user. And there I have to ask myself, how am I building up this meta design for the users to come back to me, to find really my offering as best, because the user can go now with one mouse click to many other direct banks. Not a problem at all. So that is changing the gameplay for me, for me as a bank, where the user experience becomes really strategic. And that is where I disagree right now with you, Paolo. The user experience is the most strategic point you have in your whole setup of your service which you want to provide.
Well, as long as that becomes an engagement mechanism, if it stays at the convenience element, it's valid the way, right? So that's where the two elements that we reconcile. Jasmin.
And that is truly the difference when you work with a user experience or a game designer. Because if you're putting a game designer, that's why I built a gamification chapter within the company I worked for, is that a game designer looks different on user experience and user engagement than a pure user experience designer, because a user experience designer does make it convenient to consume, to come very fast from A to B, very consumable. Mm-hmm. And a game designer would make it as enjoyable to come from A to B. Sure, there needs to be a good user experience as well. So it needs to be convenient, but it needs to be, and I now say a bad word, fun, because it's very hard to make it fun, or what is fun. But for me, it is very important that, especially as well in the financial sector, the last project I had was for a loan provider in the South Asian area, and they did as well a gamified app, because it was an application of the bank, so that the bank is not just a bank like a logo. It has a personality, it gives you trust, it has a little bit of a story. You can evolve with your bank, because we're looking back into the financial sector in former times. Bank were your partner grow, to get your house done, to get your loan, to get your, care about you. And now in the digital area, it's really like fragmented. You don't have your personal guy to talk to or women to talk to. And now it is really unpersonal. But it's very important if we're looking into a game or into games, and that's where gamification for me is then coming back, is we need to build a world in this app. It's not just building something consumable. It needs to be created. And as well, give the bank some of a personality and grow with your customers. That is something very important, and that they grow in their own way. I know this is very, very, very hard to do, because it has very different possibilities to grow, right? And it's not easy to be foreseen. And for me, it needs to be interlocked. User experience is key, sure. But it as well needs to go with the strategic goals of the financial sector, as well as with the business models, because that can tremendously change, and as well with the offerings you are having. That is something which really needs to be tied in everything together. And that is what a good game as well. If we're looking into games, how they are made, we can learn a lot of them, how they are made, and bringing that into business. So what I say to my clients is, think that you're building a game, because then you already have a good gamification in your app, because you're not create to consume. You create that your customers are the creator of the content or the app. And that is something what I found very tremendous helpful in the last years.
So if I can summarize what you both just said, Philipp highlighted that banking is an offer-driven industry that dictates most of the times the methods and the time. The problem is that digital instead is a demand-driven technology, so it is super important to find ways to motivate people, to enable them to be capable of reach out and come back. And coming back means it's not just one point in time. The experience is something that needs to happen thereafter, so it's an enforcement mechanism. Now, Jasmin, you basically said that the gamification is there because value or the perception of value needs to last longer than that moment of convenience. And so that if it lasts longer, I remember it, so I'm happy to come back. So I have a positive feeling and a positive perception about engaging with this fintech or with this bank on digital when the gamification principles are plugged in and it's understood how to do that. And that means that there is an element here that enables this value to last longer than the moment of convenience, which is about the emotions.
Yes.
So now we are at the first half of this episode of Breaking Banks Europe. So we'd invite all of the audience to stay with us a few seconds as we have a little commercial break and get back with us for the second half where we start the conversation with Jasmin about emotions and gamification. Stay with us.
Do you want to be part of Breaking Banks Europe? Reach out and learn more about the opportunity to be featured in one of our shows. With over 1.6 million listeners and counting, Breaking Banks Europe is bound to become the place to advance critical dialogue in Europe and the UK fintech scene. Reach out on Instagram or Twitter at Breaking Banks EU or go to www.provoke.fm.
Welcome back to Breaking Banks Europe, episode 61. We had a wonderful first half where I discussed with Jasmin and Philipp the essence of gamification, the difference between experience and engagement, and how to plug emotions inside, or at least we started discussing that to make sure that people have the right motivation to engage with a certain provider more than another, creating stickier relationships, and basically making financial services a bit more easier to consume compared to what it has been so far. So now we opened this episode with Jasmin mentioning the word emotions, which struck my attention. And that's where I want to start the second half of today's episode on gamification, trying to understand what does it mean emotions in the perspective of the gamification of financial services.
So for me, emotions are key to understand what the user really wants or how to solve as well the question they may have. Or even if they don't have a question, they probably wanted to do something. So as I'm an experienced designer as well, for me, the basis of games as well, of experiences as well, of motivations lie in emotions. It could be as well negative ones like avoid loss or impatience or whatever kind you can think of that. And as well, it could be being epic or creativity or create something together. And this is very important for me and as well probably for others to understand that this is the underlying concept. If you create based on emotions, you create based on values because our brain is working like that. And if you have something like an epic win is something when you win something which you didn't think you could have won beforehand, like the boss monster, and you fight 3 hours and then you finally did it. You get endorphins, and this is something. So hormones in your brain, and this is something which, for me, is very, very important. Was key to understand a good gamification and the design process. That those underlying psychological principles, emotions, they are based on values, they're based on culture, they're based on us, and that's what we can't change as human beings. This is key, what we should create. So we should not create customer-centric. We should create emotion and value-centric from my point of perspective.
That means looking beyond the transactions, in essence, and trying to understand what really happens in between two peoples or the digital medium and the final customer, because ultimately it is about digitizing relationships, not necessarily digitizing products, because as people have a harder time inside themselves, they look for relationships. So gamification mechanisms and principles enable you to understand how to rebuild that relationship element in a way that is a bit more like human, okay, though it is not human, it's very different. Now, Philipp, we said that gamification and gaming, okay, is not the same thing. Now, you've been working with a lot of developers and people in the world of games, and definitely they might have an understanding of what it means to build a game and to exploit or adopt the principles of gamification for their purposes. When you look at financial services, you may not typically find people that were accustomed to the topic of building games and not necessarily understanding the gamification principles. How do you believe the industry can learn from the gaming industry and onboard the right mindset and competencies, really to, first of all, picture and understand, and then operate with gamification in terms of digitizing their businesses?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, it's very tempting to go into the gamification direction or building games. My point is always you need to take it serious and be very aware what problem do you want to solve, first of all, to which target group, what is the profile of this target group, how do I communicate with them, how can I offer a gamified or a game experience to them which is meaningful and taking them serious. I have had recently a lot of projects were worked on where the idea of a game is the solution, and then you have different project managers who are coming in very engaged and have lots of ideas, and the outcome is mostly very poor. This has then the consequence that they spend a lot of money in the gaming project. They're creating a game, but at the end, then they have just the game and haven't solved the problem because the game is poor, the user experience is the feedback not very well, and so on. So it's creating actually more problems than solutions. So what you have to do is really trying to understand, who do I want to engage with this game? What type of people are there? Jasmin already mentioned the aspect of emotions. That is exactly how game developers are thinking. How can I really create here a fun, engaging, inspirational environment in order to solve this specific problem or which I want to address? That means the first one is which area. So are we really just talking about, for example, customer acquisition? Is that the problem I want to solve? Is a game the most appropriate tool in order to solve that? If the decision is positive and the project is moving towards that, then I have to look into it and ask myself, what type of games are these people or my target group playing? How can I really address it in a serious way that they don't think it is either condescending or very boring? It needs to be really spot on. Otherwise, they don't play this game. It's very simple. They played once and then they are not coming back. But a game lives from interaction, from longevity. So it is really not as easy just to say, okay, let's build a game and all problems solved. It is a sometimes very painful process and very long-term in order to get there where the industry is right now. Yes. And this is what external companies and industries like the financial industry has to go through. They have to go through a specific learning process, and I can see they are not there yet. There's a long way, and it's lots to do, but there is certainly there is certainly the opportunity there. But you have to go methodologically and really focus on your target group.
Oh.
What do they want out of a game?
So, Philipp, that's why I would say at the beginning we mentioned that gamification is about principles and mechanisms. Now, the difference between the two, and that equally important, is that the mechanism is what you see in the very end once you made a decision. But the principles need to be there ex ante at the very beginning as part of your design thinking process when you design and think of the journey that you want your clients to have on your digital platform. And if you miss that point, just having the mechanics will not lead to the wanted outcome, because you might have missed the target. So you're not going in the right direction. And another thing that I like what you said again is like, you want to do customer acquisition, and so what, right? So with the moment you engage with somebody and you want them to move that someone forward, right, so to a next screen and to following screen. So you might not want to think about isolated interactions, thinking through the lens of gamification principles, but you want to have a continuum, right, of those interactions that are all participating into a way of engaging an individual, providing the right feedback to that individual, so that he keeps on moving forward in a coherent and consistent way. So it's like, I can have 10 different type of developers or projects running at the same time, but they all need to have something in common, which moves from the one into the other, because you need to transfer that emotion from the first step to the second step, and so on and so forth, right? So they may need to share common elements and grounds. Now, we said that gamification is good. Okay, it can also be bad. Unfortunately, like everything we do, evil is in the details, but especially technology is in a sense neutral, depends on how we want to use it. We saw cases of fintech being fined by the regulators because they misused the gamification ideas, trying to invite people to make unaware financial decisions, especially less financially educated user groups like young individuals. I'm thinking of the recent case about Robinhood, for example. So how would you define let's say, delicacies, the limitations around gamification? Where do they come from, so that, being aware, the industry transparently addresses them in ethical ways?
I would say, sorry if I go into that directly, it's about the ethical part. I mean, there can be as well wrong games, to be honest. I mean, there was involved a game which was about rape and stuff, which was really having a lot of rumors and troubles and stuff as well. So there are as well bad games out there. So it's about the ethical way as well, and moral way how we use gamification. And as we build systems, we can't foresee all the time how the behavior is changing of human beings, because they as well have their loop of how they understand and perceive certain mechanics or certain stories or certain stuff. So that's very hard to foresee. And as well, there are stuff which is just bad designed. So really poor design. Just for my last project, where they wanted to have as well a gamified app, they just throwed like the mechanic on it, like just collect 5 hearts, like these point badges and a leaderboard stuff, where we then had the problem, okay, but what outcome is what you want to have, that they collected 5 things, and then they have you messing up your artificial intelligence, because they get requests on that, and so on and so forth. And do you really need to gamify a loan application? I would say no, because for the loan application, it's important that you get the loan fast, and you need appropriate data quality. And if you're doing and give them a countdown because you just wanted to have it very fast, then you're messing up your backend, because data accuracy is not there. So I think the ethical is something, and moral part is something really important. So there are good banks, bad banks, and so on and so forth. That goes for gamification as well. You can have black hat gamification as well, but as well for the purpose of what Philipp mentioned. What problem are you solving? What is your goal? And I think if you do that in a, in a good human way, then it is good designed. It's very hard to answer to say that's a bad gamification, in the sense that they wanted to, make people feeling bad. I think maybe Robinhood wanted to have it in a good way, and maybe they didn't think till the end.
Okay, so that prompts another question. Maybe Philipp wants to jump into this one. How do you measure the impact of the gamification principles when you insert them into your design thinking and digitization process? What type of information do you look for? Is it the way the users react? How often they come back? Can you give us some examples at the top of your mind that you can think of?
This is basically what we are doing. We are looking into the data where very specific event is happening.
Yeah.
So you look into, let's say, onboarding, for example, and you see that if there is a certain context, like let's say they have to click a button, and 60-70% don't click the button and disappearing out of the game, then you know something is wrong with the button.
Yeah.
So now you are either fixing the button, giving a new color, or you are gamify the button in order to improve basically here the performance. So, and that is where user experience is then going into it, and it's applying exactly these tools and principles, improving user experience, improving the flow, that you manage to go from A to B, basically. That is what you're doing. That is basically then just an optimization principle, and now you are thinking about. You have several ways to do it. You can now apply gamificated approaches, gamificated mechanism. So, and that's why I'm saying the actual gamification is not the problem. Also, not with Robinhood. It's not the gamification the problem. The problem is the actual goal they wanted to achieve, getting more unaware, uneducated users into investment straight away, so that they're making basically all these decisions and increasing their fees, but without thinking that first I need to educate and really increase the financial literacy in order to make then these risk-enabled decisions at the end. So it's not the gamification the problem, it is always the business objectives at the end, where I want to move my journey and my audience towards it.
But isn't it the end, sorry to ask, but at the end everybody wants to make business and money. So for me, the question always I ask my clients is how and why? Because, like in Robinhood, maybe the intent was not to, how should I say, to being bad and have, like those bad reputation at the end. Maybe they didn't think completely through it, that they need, as you said, Philipp, to educate the people first because they make educated decisions. So for me, then, this is something, yes, where the gamification is not a problem, maybe, but it is as well not the solution, because it made it worse that people really thought they can do it and they felt like heroes or whatsoever. So for me, to be honest, it's a bad design decision because it was not completely holistic thought through. And this is what I see in a lot of, how should I say, gamification or games or user experience, is that it just think from A to B, and that they just create that little journey, but not the surrounding. They don't think of the ecosystem. What kind of aspect, what kind of impact do you have to a behavior? What kind of, I'm going to now to Tinder. Tinder wouldn't work in real world. I mean, if you say like that or that to somebody, like a thumbs up, thumbs down in front of a guy or women, you probably would have a slap in your face. Mm-hmm. But it works in digital. But what we can see is now that like bullying or like hate in digital areas, because it's anonymous, is rising. And this is what we can see as well in the behavior in the digital area in gamification, when it's used in a not thought through way, because what we can see in game communities most of the time, not in ego shooters mostly, we can see that there's a lot of positive energy working together collaboratively because they're using different mechanics. And I think that is just, like, because the behavior is not thought through, it's just thought through to A to B, but not what is the bigger impact of the behavior you're designing. That is just
just on that point, Jasmin, it is a journey. It is a long-term experience. Let's look at Robinhood again. Robinhood is disruptive because of their simplistic user design. This is so easy to use this tool, this application, in order to make financial transactions that everyone loves it, because keep it as simple as possible. Of course, the side effect is, of course, that more people are using it, and a few are then having this kind of outlier experience. They're doing stuff which they shouldn't do. That is the journey, what I was talking about earlier. We need to go through this process. These financial industry needs to go through this process, identifying the problems which are coming with a great gamificated experience and tackle it. So in total, the direction is right. The solutions they're coming up with are mostly right. We're talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and we have to eliminate the ugly, basically.
So, Philipp, if I can say, power and frictionless come with responsibility, right? So the two needs to go hands in hand. Now, as Breaking Banks Europe likes the topic of gamification, and one of the key elements of gamification is to reward the audience or the users of a digital app with something that can be an emotion, that can be convenience, that can be something else. We have a reward for our audience that stayed with us until the end of the show. We have Matthias Kröner, who is my co-host, a great founder of Breaking Banks Europe with me since day one, and he joined us to share with us his point of view of gamification, because I know that Matthias has been also working in the field, and I really bank upon learning from him what really means for financial services. So, Matthias, if I can just sum it up, we said that the engaging experience that the gamification principles can build through gamified mechanics can help financial services and fintech to reach out to the respective customers, to empower them, to give them the right emotional layer that enables them to feel comfortable in engaging with the financial services offer. And that is not a point-in-time type of thing. It needs to be rooted into the design thinking on when you create the full user journey on your platform. So it is good to have an understanding of the gamification theory and principles, such as those that Jasmin was also reminding us at the beginning of this show. Now, you've been a fintech entrepreneur. You know what it takes to build a digital platform. So what is your point of view about the value of gamification in the future of financial services?
Yeah, well, may I just share 2 sentences on the discussion I just witnessed? And I didn't want to interrupt because I seriously have to say one point. There is regulation in place, and regulation in place is for customer protection. And if you cannot deal with customer protection, simple as that, you're not fit and proper for the business, gamified or not, doesn't matter. Yes. And that is as easy as possible. What we as banking entrepreneurs or fintech entrepreneurs and customer-centric entrepreneurs need to understand is, however, how to overcome that. And coming back to this Robinhood example, how to overcome the financial illiteracy, which is not only a third world issue, it's a first world issue as well. How to come that non-education on financial topics and how to make people, positively engaged and positively excited to learn about finance, right? So this is something we could talk about. Driving people into 12,000 transactions into a half of a year, like 12,000 transactions in 6 months for non-educated traders is simply irresponsible. No discussion. Because all statistics out of the last 50 years prove us that churning, and this is what we call churning. Now, I think we have a big challenge and a big opportunity also naturally, which is financial services companies on the one side are deeply frustrating to customers, overwhelming with complexity and so on. And on the one side, they're customers. But at the same time, it is also that we see that the gaming industry and even the betting industry, I know that the gamers hate the bettors and so on, but doesn't matter. They have millions of people actually that are willing to spend money there, that are highly enthusiastic about it. And we speak all in all, something like this positive, motivating. How can we learn out of that? And what kind of a DNA component do we need to transport maybe into financial services? This is why I think personally this topic is totally exciting. I haven't got an answer for that today, and I wouldn't care. But you know, this is something like the new. I would say this is something like potentially a new wave of fintech actually coming, merging and cross-breeding those two streams.
Reality is broken. That is what Jane McGonigal would have said at that point of time. It is just not engaging enough. In a game, you always sell kind of a dream, and you play that dream, and you can be somebody different. That is as well why social media like Instagram is like hitting through the roof.
But if I have a look to hyper casual games, I would say, and you know, Philipp, you're definitely more aware of the real naming to all this. You know, where I have this one skill games like I'm running, I'm jumping, I'm doing this, I'm doing that.
Yeah, sure.
I would not have a dream that I'm the little monkey jumping there, but people deal with it. You know. That's the one thing. The other thing is that we have something like a whole industry emerging, which is called game-based learning.
Yeah.
So, you know,
can I, Matthias, just on that example here, you said something very, very correct. Yeah. Why are these hyper-casual games working? Because they are hyper-specific.
Yes.
They have one element which they are optimizing down the line. Do the same in regards to a business transaction. So here it is about really being as precise as possible with what you want to gamify or what you want to create a game around it. Is it the learning? Okay, good. What type of learning is financial literacy is again a very, very broad topic. What can we do? Is it about currency exchange mechanism or is it about risk assessment? Yeah. So if it's about risk assessment, we have already here the specification. What can we do in order to create here a great gaming environment? So that is the question. We have to break it down to the lowest level and then think about how can we build a game out of it. And then it works. But not when we are blurring and throwing into the pot thousands of aspects, thousands of ideas and so on, because then we're creating just nothing. And that is what we need to understand.
Philipp, if I could answer your implicit questions and actually thank everybody for their contribution, because we are at the end of the 61st episode of Breaking Banks Europe on gamification. At the very beginning, we said that we have gamification, which is about principles and mechanics, and we have gaming, which is about the real game. But we also said that there might be something in between, which is basically use games to gamify some needs in financial services. And some of these could be the difficulty of people to learn the financial problem and basically to be educated. And the way games can help with gamification principles to educate people differently is through the emotions they can convey, which is another word that Jasmin used at the beginning and in the second half of the show, because you can basically educate people, making them learn how to learn behaviors through emotions that are part of a gamification journey. And that is where this learning stays with individuals and gives them back, Philipp, as you said, at some point, control and the capability to self-direct in transparent and robust and ethical ways. So I thank you, everybody, for the participation today. I remind the audience we had Jasmin Karatas, we have Philipp Wagner, and at the end, the special appearance of Matthias Kröner. This was the 61st episode of Breaking Banks Europe dedicated to gamification. I invite you to follow up on all social media, on your best podcast platform. It's free, it's engaging, it's Breaking Banks Europe. And that's a wrap.
Thanks Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.